African Grey Parrot. 4 simple words from this bird did something to me that nothing else in the hardest year of my life had been able to do. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why. What you are about to hear is not a story about a talking bird performing a trick. It is a story about a bird that somehow knew exactly what to say, exactly when I needed to hear it the most. I never expected that 4 words from a bird would be the moment I finally let myself cry after the hardest year of my life. It was late at night, the house was completely silent, and I was sitting on the floor in front of the cage because I genuinely did not have the strength to get up and go to bed. I had not said a single word out loud in almost an hour, just sitting there in the dark with my own thoughts, when the African Grey Parrot suddenly leaned forward on its perch and looked directly at me. And then, completely unprompted, in a voice so soft and so gentle that it did not even sound like its usual tone, the African Grey Parrot said the exact words I needed to hear in that exact moment. It said, "It's okay." The same 2 words I had said to that bird 100 times during storms, during vet visits, during every moment it had ever been frightened. In that single moment, I understood something about this African Grey Parrot that I had never fully let myself believe before. It had been listening to me far more closely than I had ever listened to myself. Every single person who has ever lived with an African Grey Parrot will tell you the same thing. These birds do not simply repeat sounds. They choose moments, and they choose them with a precision that defies easy explanation. This is a video about every single one of those moments. The words that arrived at exactly the right second, the phrases that felt impossibly aware, and the African Grey Parrot moments that genuinely changed how I understand love. Some of these stories are about grief, some are about joy, some are about fear, and some are about moments so small that on paper they sound like nothing at all. But living through them felt like everything. African Grey Parrot. Before any of those crying moments could happen, there was a beginning, and like most beginnings with these birds, it started with absolutely no idea what I was actually getting myself into. The African Grey Parrot was sitting alone in the very back corner of the room, not making a single sound, while every other bird around it called out for attention. I remember crouching down to its eye level, and the African Grey Parrot did something that I now understand is incredibly significant. It did not look away, and it did not flinch. It simply held my gaze. Nobody warned me that the first 3 weeks would be almost entirely silent. The African Grey Parrot barely moved from its highest perch, watched everything I did with intense suspicion, and gave absolutely no sign of warming to me. On the 19th day, the African Grey Parrot took a single sunflower seed directly from my fingers for the very first time, and I genuinely sat on the floor afterward and cried from pure relief and joy. It took the African Grey Parrot almost 5 months before it stepped onto my hand willingly, and I remember exactly where I was standing in the kitchen when it finally happened without any hesitation at all. Every single evening for that entire first year, I sat on the floor beside its cage and simply talked about my day, about nothing in particular, about whatever crossed my mind. Because somewhere I had read that this was how trust gets built. The first word the African Grey Parrot ever said clearly was its own name, and it said it completely out of nowhere, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, while I was washing dishes in the next room. I dropped the plate I was holding into the sink, and ran into the living room so fast that the African Grey Parrot startled slightly. But then it said its name again, slower this time, as if it understood exactly what it had just done. That moment in the kitchen taught me something I would carry with me through every single one of the years that followed. This African Grey Parrot was not simply mimicking sound, it was reaching toward me. African Grey Parrot moments of joy started arriving faster than I expected once that first word broke through, almost as if the bird had been quietly storing up language and waiting for permission to use it. It learned to say good morning within the same month, always timed perfectly to the exact moment the curtains were opened. Never a second before, and never a second after. There was a particular afternoon when the African Grey Parrot watched me laugh uncontrollably at something on my phone, and a few minutes later, it began making the exact sound of my own laugh, perfectly replicated over and over. Hearing my own laugh echoed back to me by this bird was one of the strangest and most wonderful experiences of my entire life. It felt like being shown a mirror I never knew existed. The day the African Grey Parrot learned to say my name was different from every other word it had learned, because it never used it carelessly. It only ever said it when it specifically wanted my attention. I will never forget standing in the hallway, completely frozen, the very first time it called my name, with such clear deliberate intention that there was absolutely no mistaking it for random mimicry. From that day forward, whenever the African Grey Parrot called my name in that particular tone, I learned to drop whatever I was doing immediately, because it almost always meant it genuinely wanted me near. These early breakthrough moments were beautiful, but I had no idea yet how much deeper this bird's emotional awareness actually went. The moments still to come would teach me that far more clearly than I was prepared for. African Grey Parrot. There was a night, several years into our life together, when I had a painful argument with someone I loved on the phone, and I did not realize the bird had been listening to every single word. After I hung up the phone, I sat there for a long time in complete silence, and from the other room, the African Grey Parrot began very softly and quietly saying, "It's okay," repeating it gently, over and over. It was not loud, it was not performed, it was the exact soft tone I had always used with it during thunderstorms. And somehow, on that particular night, it gave that same comfort back to me without being asked. I walked into the room and sat on the floor in front of its cage, and the African Grey Parrot climbed down to the lowest perch, closer to me than it had ever positioned itself before, and continued speaking softly. There was an entire week once when I genuinely did not feel like myself, when getting out of bed felt like the hardest task in the world. And the African Grey Parrot seemed to notice before I had even said a single word about it. It stopped its usual loud morning greetings that entire week, and instead, it would simply watch me quietly from its perch, occasionally making a single soft contact call, as if checking that I was still there. On the fourth day of that difficult week, completely without warning, the African Grey Parrot said, "I love you," clearly and slowly, a phrase it had only ever said a handful of times before, and never at a moment that felt this intentional. I do not have adequate words to explain what it felt like to receive those exact words from a bird at the precise moment I needed to hear them most. It broke something open in me that I had been holding closed for days. African Grey Parrots are sometimes described in scientific papers as having the emotional intelligence of a very young child. But living through moments like that, one taught me that the description barely captures what these birds are truly capable of feeling.